For those who have never experienced the terror of having another person physically and literally bend them to their will, the sculpture might be just a fanciful bit of nostalgia. But for assault survivors, it's an oversized PTSD trigger.
This sculpture is a deception. The original photograph has its place in art history, and it can be taught in context. The sculpture has become an example of how easily a split second of time can be misunderstood, misconstrued, and misused. To recognize mistakes takes strength. For a municipality, perhaps it takes something more than that.
It's so front and center, you can't avoid seeing it if it traumatizes you.
We can, now more than before, look at this work and say it does not represent the best of us.
I do some volunteer work, and I worked with a young person who had been sexually assaulted, and she refused to walk anywhere near that statue because she said he was hurting her, because she looked up and she saw the arch of the back and the off-balanced leg and the deep, deep bend that said, this is not a loving act. This is an act of violence. And it's the force of that today that I find so deeply troubling. We end up with 75 years later, because of the size of this sculpture and its placement and its signage and everything about it, is a reenactment by consenting couples of a violent act of a fake idea of a romantic ideal. I have great respect for those who fought and served. My grandfather was one of them. 2 of his brothers died in that war. You know, I don't want to in any way take away from their sacrifice and their valor, but I don't think that this statue represents the best of the military.
I think I'm actually leaning more towards not putting the statue at the Bayfront, because even though the photograph was in the past, I think that the statue has already served its purpose. Like, we shouldn't keep the statue just to kind of keep the status quo bias that permeates our culture. And I think about the rape culture, I also do really agree with that, because even though some people might not be aware of what the statue, like what the situation was, if we continue to have it as like the centerpiece of Sarasota, it does contribute to that culture.
I've heard the arguments, this is popular. Yes, it is. So was the Roman Colosseum. We should not erect a new one by the Van Wezel and start feeding Christians to lions. I mean, some things you just can't do. They are morally wrong.